Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hi, and welcome back to UNO. Now, I don't want you to think that I have some ulterior political motive in having my guest on this week. My guest, by the way, is the new chairman of the Nebraska Republican Party, David Kramer. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Now, just for the record, I want, this was not planned, the week of the mayor's race, to get only one side on. We had tried to get you right after your election as party chief, but you were on taking a little respite with the wife.
I was actually sucking up a little bit, if you will, payback for a couple of missed trips last year, and so Beth and I had a chance to go to Paris, France for 5 days. We're expecting our first child in July, and so this was our last big trip before we become parents.
Ooh la la.
Yes, ooh la la.
But the point I'm making, I just wanted to kind of get that in the record that we'd hope to have you
Earlier.
right after your inauguration.
So thank you for allowing me to take that trip.
I'm sure you wouldn't have taken it if I hadn't asked you. It is after 6 years. You know, one of the crew's favorite shows here all the time when we did this show was every year we did what we call the Chuck and Ann show, or the Ann and Chuck show, which was the head of the Democratic and Republican Party, Ann Boyle and Chuck Sigerson. And the crew always enjoyed the repartee between the two. And certainly Chuck could never be accused of holding back.
Right.
So then Chuck says, you know, I'm going to take a break here. I think I'll run for city council. And there's a couple people running for your job, and then all of a sudden the governor says, you know, I'd really like this guy. Mm-hmm. And you lost your competition, you pulled out. And so now you're it.
I am. You know, first of all, I'll just say Chuck Sigerson, when he took over 6 years ago, we didn't have any Republican statewide office holders. We didn't have we had a Republican presence across the state, but certainly no leadership. And Chuck stepped in and really did a great job of doing what needed to be done at that time. And as we got more Republican elected leaders across the state, we had an elected governor, elected a senator. The role of the party chairman changes a little bit, and that's why, as the governor got involved in this past race, historically in Nebraska and in other states as well, the governor's
is the titular head
of the party, and usually the person who's in the chairman's seat is someone with whom the governor has a good, strong working relationship, and a comfort that, especially as we have a Senate election next year and a gubernatorial election next year, someone who can work very closely with the governor's office to make sure that the party is on the same page as we go forward into an election cycle.
Well, and Governor Joe Hans and Chuck had a couple little wrinkles in the thing back a ways, and sort of that got calmed down. But Chuck did his job.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, he was pretty strident at times, and I have to say, very quick with the comeback. I mean, he was interesting. He kept people listening, Democrats and Republicans.
Absolutely. And, you know, a little bit of controversy is not a bad thing either in terms of creating a story and making sure that one side or another of an issue gets out. And Chuck was always great at doing that, and we hope to build on the successes that he's done. I think that, and we do have two Republicans running in that district, but I think, you know, if Chuck were to be successful in that race, he would be great on the city council as an advocate, Republican or Democrat, for the people in that neighborhood. So.
Okay, are you going to be the kind of chairman publicly? I mean, behind the scenes, Chuck certainly was good at getting people motivated and, as you said, putting office holders in on that R side of the aisle. And but in terms of his outward sort of persona, how do you see yours shaping up?
Well, I think there's two different kind of roles. It's one thing to run and get people elected. It's another thing once people are elected to continue to govern. And so it's much more difficult once you're governing, I've always believed, to continue to explain the message and why it is you should be allowed to stay in power and govern in the state. We as Republicans now have the obligation and the duty to share why we can continue to govern, and that's harder. And so my role as chairman is to coordinate between the statewide elected officials and make sure that the party mechanism is working on a day-to-day basis. When I talk about the party mechanism, I mean the 93 county party organizations. I mean putting together the grassroots infrastructure that will enable us, after the primary is over, to support all of those Republicans that get elected, primarily on a statewide basis, but also in the legislature. So it'll be a little bit different, I think, because we're focusing more on re-electing people, whereas when Chuck took over, they were focusing on electing people, and it's a different kind of job.
Okay, let's talk about re-electing somebody. We had the primary race for mayor and also city council in Omaha this week, and obviously the Republicans want to keep Hal Daub in City Hall. You saw the World Herald this week that broke down the turnout and what parts of town voted for Hal and which voted for Mike Fahey. And one of the things that bothers me as a citizen, now things will bother you as a party chair, you say, you got to work on it, is this going to become an east-west town?
You know, I think
politically.
I think historically it has been, and it first manifested itself 10 years ago when Julie Haney ran against Sam Howell for county treasurer. If you'll recall the World Herald in that time, the front page story was a line down 72nd Street. It was entirely red east of 72nd Street for Howell and completely blue west of 72nd Street for Julie Haney. Now, one of the things that excites me as a Republican and the Republican chairman in Douglas County is if you look at the creep of the Republican votes in the mayor's race eastward. You bring in all of Memorial Park, all of Fair Acres, parts of Benson. You pick up a number of significant neighborhoods east of 72nd Street, which is good from my perspective for the Republican Party. While this is technically a non-partisan race, you have two very partisan people who are running.
With partisan histories.
With partisan histories and different visions for the city. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you turn to the party. And party affiliation is something that we've seen historically. As the city has grown westward, you tend to have people who register Republican. And in the older, more established neighborhoods, you have people who register Democrat.
Okay,
And
why do you think that is so slow to change when the parties, maybe you'll say the Democrats haven't changed, that the Republicans have been more flexible to change, but is that going to continue on forever?
well,
Not just the East-West, but this feeling of, you know, the Republicans are new and the Democrats are old, or, I mean, do you worry that you might get complacent about
and that
about
is the biggest, you know, and I think the complacency was best evidenced in this mayoral primary, where if you look at turnout, particularly in historic areas where we've had heavy turnout, which are historically Republican areas, we didn't have that this time around. And part of my job as chairman is to make sure that the folks are fired up across the state to get out and vote. If we become complacent, I guarantee you'll see a dramatic shift in the city of Omaha and in the state of Nebraska in terms of party registration, philosophy, those kinds of things. We have to continue to hone the message. We also have to be in a position to reach out to new communities that come to be a part of the state. And one of the things that's happening not only in Nebraska but across the country is that the Hispanic population is booming, and the Hispanics are becoming the largest minority group in the country, in the state of Nebraska, in the city of Omaha. And as that begins to happen, both political parties face the challenge of crafting a message that resonates within communities that may not traditionally be their constituencies, to welcome them into the party.
And the interesting thing is, there's two interesting things that play into both nationally and your specific talents. Number one, nationally, Hispanics, though many are drawn to certain Democratic stereotypes, there are certain groups of Hispanic or Latino, I mean, whatever you want to, you know, they can't even decide exactly what. But the Cubans, of course, vote very Republican. And there's other pockets of Hispanics. But the way I figure, they're sort of open. They're kind of an open book.
That's right. And they're in play, which is all the more reason why the parties have to focus attention on them. The African American community, when it's voting 8 or 9 to 1 in favor of the Democratic Party, it's a little harder for, the Democrats to have a tendency to take that vote for granted, and it's a little harder for the Republicans to crack into that because it's such an overwhelming majority. With the Hispanic community, they don't tend or trend one way or another automatically, and so there's great opportunity with message development and outreach to bring them in.
Well, the other thing is you, as was pointed out in the World Herald, and of course was pointed out in your life, I mean, they didn't take the World Herald to point this out, is that you were raised in a bilingual family in a sense. Your mother was from Panama. You'd go summers to see Grandpa and work on the farm.
Yep.
And so not only do you have this, which the majority of Omahans and Nebraskans don't have. I can't speak a word of Spanish. Well, maybe 3. But I mean, we tend to be very isolated, and yet demand that they learn to speak our language. But the other thing is that they tend to be real business self-starters, and you're very knowledgeable in the business world. You're really positioned to lead a party that is making a foray into getting these people registered and voting.
I hope so. And that's certainly one of the reasons one of the things that I ran on as I ran for chairman. I think that's one of the things that Governor Johans and Senator Hagel found to be attractive about my candidacy. I think that's one of the things that Republican State Central Committee found to be attractive. And it's not just here in Omaha. You go across the state,
Columbus.
you go to Norfolk, Columbus, Scottsbluff, Lexington, which has become a 25% of the population in the county out there is Hispanic. They are a majority in the city of Lexington, and they're a majority minority school district. And so my ability, I think, to go in and speak a language generally without an accent, to be able to go talk to folks, have a shared experience with them, to be able to focus on the entrepreneurship side of the Hispanic community, which is a very hardworking, entrepreneurial
go down to South
group of
Omaha.
folks. And that fits right into, really from my perspective, fits right into the Republican message and why they ought to be considering being Republicans. As I've worked in the Hispanic community, it's something that, this is not a short-term project. And outreach is not something that you do every 4 years when you need a vote. Outreach is something that we have to live every day within the African American community, within the Hispanic communities, within the Asian communities. We have to make an effort to include those folks in party politics, in our communities, in all the things that we do. And as we go about doing that and focusing on the shared and common ideas and goals that we have, then you're a little more successful with the outreach. With the Hispanic community, they suffer a couple of obstacles that have to be overcome before they can become effective politically, I think. First of all is we have to make sure that folks are in the country legally. And the ones who are here legally, that they naturalize and become citizens. Once they've become citizens, they need to learn English, because English is the primary language. It's good for them to be bilingual, of course, but learning English will be a fundamental goal. Once they've done that, then they need to get out and register to vote. Once they've registered to vote, we have to be organized as a community. And once we're organized as a community, then we have to exercise that right to vote.
Well, I don't know if you can do all that in the 4 years that you...
And nor am I trying to. But I'm just laying the groundwork.
I'm teasing.
No, I'm just laying the groundwork. Because if you don't look at it as that type of process, one of the reasons why the African American community is so successful in being influential in politics is because they're very well organized, they mobilize to vote, and as you mobilize to vote, same for senior citizens, for example, these are targetable groups that say, I deliver on election day a block of voters.
They can have some expectations.
They have some expectations. The Hispanic community isn't sufficiently organized yet to warrant them having the kind of political clout that their numbers indicate they might otherwise have.
Well, let me ask you this. It seems for some of the reasons, both you specifically, but Republicans in general, and their kinship with pockets of Hispanic groups, it seems to me that if you and your party are success, and I'm not going to talk about ideology, so if people call and say, oh, those Republicans or all those Democrats, I'm not talking about that right now. But if you as a group are successful over the long haul, 20, 30 years of doing that, then that pretty much would be the death knell of the Democratic Party. In sheer numbers, in terms of the growth you have now among the traditional white population, and if you make those inroads in what is becoming the majority minority nationwide.
Absolutely, I think that's right. But we also have to look at historically, politics is cyclical, and we have a tendency to get complacent. You get in power, you go for a while. American people like change. Invariably, what happens in politics today, you essentially have a third of the people who are Republican, a third of the people who are Democrat, a third of the people who are neither, and that third in the middle are the ones who make the decisions when they participate in the electoral process. So
They're the ones that all that advertising money goes to sway.
They're that great unwashed middle that you're trying to get to swing
don't have an
one way or another.
allegiance
They don't have an
necessarily.
allegiance. Now, as a majority party, I mean, we don't have any party that's a majority party in terms of membership, but the plurality party always has an advantage going in to an election, because if you just mobilize your people to vote, you have to get fewer of the non-registereds out to, or the people who have not chosen a party to vote your way in order to win. And so that's the struggle. We're struggling at a rate of picking up 4 to 5% of the vote overall is what we're talking about.
Let's talk about campaigning, and specifically the McCain-Feingold bill, which is on a pretty fast track, but we don't know what's going to happen, and then if it does pass both houses or gets decided on in committee, we still have some constitutional challenges.
Yes.
But as it appears, if it passes completely, what does that mean in terms of people that are in your position trying to lure dollars and trying to make statements?
Well, I think it makes our job at the political party level much more difficult. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're organized as a political party, because what McCain-Feingold has done, or as it's been passed so far, is it essentially federalizes local races.
Okay, explain that.
What I mean is, today you have limits on spending that are set by the federal government, and they deal only with races for federal offices, for president, for Senate, for your House seats. Only those are covered by federal campaign finance law. In the state of Nebraska, for example, we have a whole separate set of laws that govern those people who run for office, only local offices from the governor on down. McCain-Feingold says, if you have an election that has a federal office on that election, political party
On that ballot.
Political party, you cannot spend any state-raised money in any way. You can't spend money to get out the vote. You can't spend money to say vote Republican. You can't spend money to identify prospective voters. You can't spend any money raised at the local level unless it meets all the criteria of the money that you raised for the federal races. Even if I don't talk about the federal races. There are only 7 states in the country that don't elect their major offices at the same time they're electing the federal offices. So for all intents and purposes, it really emasculates the ability of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in Nebraska to play any major or significant role in elections whenever there's a federal race on the ballot. And so, I mean, it's going to make my job a lot harder, because we'll have to raise money only in only by following federal law, which means that you can only give $1,000. I think they've bumped that up to $2,000 or $2,500, but you can only give this limited amount of money, and there are very few people who are capable of giving to that level of contribution. That's what concerns me.
Let me, I'm still a little unclear. As the bill stands now, and that could change any time, what just private issue money? I'm Ross Perot, and just one of the issues that's up for grabs in a federal election, and I just want to spend a wad of money just to say, I think candidate A is a jerk and should be sent to the penitentiary because he's a. I mean, just, may
Whatever.
not be one of the major issues even, or
Right.
just trying to red herring, everything from red herring to a good issue.
And one of the more, and I'm not as familiar with all of the
I won't
amendments
hold
that
you- I
happened
won't
last
hold
week,
you
but
to-
what I'll say, my understanding is that one of the amendments that was passed to McCain-Feingold that was added on was to say you can't have those kinds of issue ads within either the last 30 or 60 days leading
That's
up to.
so.
to-
It
I
seems to
think
boil
that's
down.
the-
It might be a time thing.
It might be a time thing. Now, I think that there are probably significant constitutional limits with that because basically they're saying to an individual or to an individual organization, you can't exercise your right to free speech with respect to a political position. And
However, we do know historically, maybe, I mean, I'm not saying throw the Constitution out, but historically, a lot of that has gone on at the last minute, strictly well, I guess it depends which word you want to use. Change the flow of the election or manipulate
Sure.
the election and the voters. So, I mean, it's all part of the game, and it's going to be interesting to see how
It all
the
shakes
game's
out.
rules shake out.
And the issue really is going to come down to one of constitutionality, although I find very interesting, very, very interesting. I just read some analysis that Tom Daschle, who of course in the Senate is the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, is doing everything he can behind the scenes to ensure that when the bill goes to conference, which is when the House and the Senate meet to hammer out their differences, that a quote-unquote poison pill gets put into the bill, which then allows the Democrats to vote against McCain, Feingold on the final vote.
So
for
they
the
don't
bill.
look like bad.
So they don't look
They
like bad
have
guys.
to. They
That
have to.
But and here's the reason why. Very simple and straightforward. The one area that the Democrats have been able to match the Republicans dollar for dollar in fundraising has been soft money. Republicans are much better
Absolutely.
at raising, and so now the question is: are they cutting their own the legs off their
Oh,
stool?
absolutely.
by
In
doing
fact, there was a textbook that I saw sold in the bookstore here at UNO on campaign finance reform. I mean, wasn't a textbook, but some professor wanted this for reading for a class, and in it, Senator Bob Kerrey
Yeah.
was quoted quite clearly as saying, "This is the worst thing
Yeah.
that could happen to Democrats in the financing arena that we are currently in," and for that very reason, is that we don't have among our base the number of individual contributors that would reach this limit.
Right.
And so the soft money's
and
great.
part of it is that, and you've been in the television industry. We're here going at this point. Part of it is campaigns have changed dramatically. We had small areas of population that generally determined most of your elections. They were done by word of mouth, by me going out on the stump. Today, campaigns are conducted on television and the radio and in the newspapers, and it's just a little harder to get out and influence people and get them out to vote, especially given the sheer numbers of people that when a member of Congress represents 565 or 570,000 people, that's a different job that Lee Terry has to communicate with his constituents than does Tom Osborne.
But
And-
Tom has a unique situation because of the distance to reach the X number of people in his district. But you look back before television had such a huge impact in campaigns. Let's go back. We could go all the way back to the infamous atomic bomb ad. But I mean, let's go back to say 1970 or 65. I mean, somewhere in there. Congressional districts still basically dealt with the same number of people.
They always will.
Right. So, why should that be an issue? Why should reaching people?
But the number of people that a congressman represents grows every time we have a census, because population grows, and so
But I mean, the numbers were huge in the first place.
not as huge as they are today. I mean, if you look at the dramatic increase in the cost of elections has happened really in the last 20 years, 25
But
years,
it hasn't
because television.
been in terms of the growth of the population. It's
No.
grown a much higher rate.
It has grown higher, but it's grown as technology has changed the way the average person doesn't read the newspaper anymore. When you would have 20 years ago had huge newspaper ads and issue position statements. Now, because the way
Right.
business is.
And we
it's the
can't
30-second
turn back
spot.
the hands of time in that sense.
Yeah.
Are there any of, I mean, I personally find it offensive just when I look at the numbers. In fact, I think this mayoral campaign may not only break a record, it may devastate the old spending record. Because we know it's going to be close, or it looks like it could be very close.
There's going to be huge spending in this race.
Right.
For a $65,000 a year job.
I know, it's just, but it's not even that. It's just that it's going to go up, and it's still going to go up, even though we're going to reach where technology isn't going to change that much.
Right.
Doesn't that sort of, even though you say we want to be constitutional, we want to be fair, but still, doesn't that just sort of bother you?
Well.
Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you like to be able to manipulate people through.
Well, but it isn't
ads.
manipulation. I mean, I guess I would
there's
like
a certain amount of it,
I'd
don't
like to
you
believe
think?
that, I'll tell you what, every piece of mail that comes into my house, I read it, I analyze it, and I pitch it into the,
I
right
have all
file.
mine from the Omaha City races and my mayor's race. I have all mine sitting in piles.
And do they,
look at it.
I mean, is it I feel I'm discerning enough to, and I read the newspaper and I try to meet with all the candidates. Heck, we in Nebraska have an incredible opportunity. We live right next door to Iowa. And starting in probably a year and a half, anybody who wants to be president of the United States will come to Council Bluffs. They'll sit in a room with 25 people.
At the Hawkeye Caucus, as I call it.
That's right. For an hour and a half, they'll answer any question they've got. I go over to all that stuff.
Oh, it's
Why?
interesting.
Because the average we don't get a chance to have that kind of interaction with presidential or congressional candidates, those kind of things. But to me, the mail.
Well, when are we going to have a
all that
real
kind of stuff-
open discussion about how to bring down the cost a little bit, or keep it in line, and engage the people more rather than making them dependent on how well produced and
We'll have that.
savvy?
We'll have that discussion when those kinds of television ads and direct mail and things stop having an influence on the election.
Yes, you're right.
That's the. And people talk about negative, negative, negative. I hate to say it, but if you've ever done the polling that follows up, negative sells.
From
I mean,
from the Reagan years when they started to refine that. I'm not blaming them, but I mean.
But I mean, that is what you're seeing in politics is just the influence of Madison.
Are
Avenue
you
and those
saying
kind of
then
things.
that this Omaha mayor's race is going to be negative from the Republican side if it sells?
I don't think so. My sense is that the mayor's got a lot of things to focus on, great accomplishments, and that's the direction he's going to go.
Well, this isn't the last we're going to hear of you. David Kramer, the new chair
Thank you
of
very
the
much.
Nebraska Republican Party. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And remember, it's UNO TV at unomaha.edu to see this show or any past Consider This shows. Thanks for joining us.
Consider This with host Carol Schrader is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.